welcome back to The Artistic Vision, a podcast on theology and the arts. This week we have the distinguished guest, Wesley Vander Lugt, who is at Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary in Charlotte. He runs a theology and arts program there at the Leighton Ford Institute, and he's put on some great events. He has one coming up in a couple weeks, co-sponsored with Christianity Today. Came out of the book we talked about in the podcast this week, Beauty is Oxygen, this past year. In the last few weeks, he came out with one, A Prophet in the Darkness, I think it's called. There'll be a link in the show notes for it. But yeah, just a fascinating guy, an interesting guy. Also runs a kind of agrarian-based program called Kinship Plot that I followed along with. Great guy, great conversation. Yeah, what'd you think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing that he has that it seems like we say with everyone that we've met so far about just how genuine, authentic they are. But the kinship plot really shows me that, like, this is not just something he writes about or he thinks is a great concept, but something that he lives. It's a really compelling vision that is taking shape before our eyes in Charlotte.
Yeah.
So he's really great. We, of course, went to the Ed Nippers event at Gordon in Charlotte, and that was really great. I feel like Wes is really stepping into a place of sort of bringing people together in this art space and theology, and I really appreciate that. And I actually sat next to him at the Baylor thing that we went to a couple years ago?
Yeah,
now?
probably.
Golly. And yeah, we're both, I think, kind of quiet guys for the most part, and I don't think we said two words to each other. So he probably thinks I'm a punk.
Yeah, well, he's not wrong, but we got it together this time. We got the
together.
Voices together for a conversation.
Yeah.
He really embodies these things he talks about. It's not just this ethereal project. Yeah. And he hosts these events at different Gordon-Conwell campuses throughout the year. So if you're around Boston, Charlotte, I think there's one in Florida somewhere. They put these events on. Go support it. It's a great thing he's doing. And here's our conversation. All right, friends, we're here with Wes Vander Lugt, educated at St. Andrews, acting director of the Leighton Ford Initiative in Theology and the Arts at Gordon-Conwell, and also author of a new book. I think we could still say it's new within the last few months. Beauty is Oxygen. And so Wes, we've gotten to know Wes a little bit from a distance and met him actually at Baylor about a year ago. Yeah, I really appreciate your work and what you're doing, and thanks for being here for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
A question we like to start with is, what was your beginnings in beauty? So a lot of us, maybe from a Christian background, beauty is kind of not part of our vocabulary. It tends maybe to be excarnated, disembodied. Some have a strong kind of artistic background from family of origin. And so kind of what got you interested in theology and the arts, beauty, the aesthetic realm?
There's so many different dimensions of that. And, what I think about first is the beauty of nature. I grew up in Minneapolis when I was really young, but then my family moved to rural Minnesota on 160 acres, and that was my paradise. I mean, I existed outside on that acreage and had this project of trying to identify every species of, plants and animals on this property, and knew every nook and cranny. So it was kind of like my Tinker Creek. Instead of being a pilgrim at Tinker Creek, I was a young pilgrim at Stonewood Acres. And it was very formative for me, I think, in ways that I'm still discovering, still trying to find out. So that was happening. And then my family was a very musical family. We were all trained on the piano, classical piano. I played saxophone as well and sang. And so there's always some kind of music going on. But because we lived in a rural area, we're fairly isolated from major cultural centers. So I really didn't experience the arts out and about beyond my school. So a lot of it was just at home, music, the beauty of stories through good books, Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, McDonald's at the Back of the North Wind. It's really formative for me, Madeline L'Engle. But then in college, I went down to Georgia for college, and I was a history major, but I took a philosophy of art class, and which, in addition to some theology classes, was my favorite class in college. And it just turned the lights on for me in terms of art wasn't just a matter of whatever I happened to like, that there was something deeper going on, that artistry of all kinds could actually be a portal into the deepest mysteries of the world and of God. And got so excited about that. And, all of my reading and film loving and music all of a sudden became much more meaningful.
Can you talk a little bit about the cultural feeling of things becoming ordinary and the kind of missing beauty in the everyday, the mundane? And I was curious as to, it seems a little bit easier sometimes, and maybe it is just a sense of distractions, but it's also true that like we just become apathetic. Maybe that has to do with distractions, but we tend to miss beauty that, like as you mentioned, like our air, it's our oxygen, it brings us to life. How do you feel like beauty meets us in the everyday, and what sort of
Mm-hmm.
reaction does that evoke from us?
I think a lot of times we're fighting an uphill battle given the cultural condition that we live in. I talk about this in terms of the expression meh, this word that was invented by Homer Simpson, but named cultural atmosphere, right? Of apathy. And it's this sort of apathy on the other side of freedom. Modern age in the West, the last several hundred years, was all about freedom, right? Freedom from authority, freedom from tradition, freedom from religious demands, freedom from rigid standards of truth and goodness and beauty. But if you're free from everything, then you're just sort of adrift to find your own way. And you have to create your own standards and find your own meaning, which is what social media capitalizes on. So while that might be exciting for a while, feels like you're on this journey of self-discovery, it just gets really exhausting. And it's hard to see the point after a while. So even though a lot of people feel meh, they're in this cultural condition of not caring about a whole lot, there still is this longing to be amazed. This is where I think beauty comes in. That true encounters with beauty move us from a meh kind of place to wow. So they move us from self-preoccupation and everything just being about me, myself, and I, to focusing our attention elsewhere on something or someone else captivating. And I think that's why people love, for example, going to concerts. I don't think it's merely about escape and entertainment. I think deep down it's this cross pressure Charles Taylor calls like we're living in this bland atmosphere, but we have a longing to be wowed, to experience beauty, to just stop focusing on ourselves. And at the very basic level, experiences of beauty move us beyond that self-centeredness. But they're also a bridge to the divine and help us pose questions like where is this even coming from, and what does this mean, and how does this challenge the environment that I'm in?
Yeah, that's great. So maybe on that note too, kind of what I hear you saying is like that beauty in some ways decenters us, but also can kind of ground us, kind of put us in a spot. So when you think about that, I think you asked this in one of your seminars that you did when you asked, where have you experienced beauty that's close to you, right? So if I were to flip that question to you, what are some ways that you practice, right? If beauty's oxygen is something you breathe in, how do you practice that? And maybe give us an experience of a time recently where it captivated you, it gave you breath.
Yeah, again, so many examples I could think of, but for me, it's about recognizing beauty really is everywhere. It's my issue, it's my busyness, it's my preoccupation that prevents me from recognizing that beauty is everywhere. So it's everything from willingness to pause when my kids are excited about something as mundane as a beetle that my son has just found, or a drawing that my daughter has done, and recognizing that it's a beautiful expression of who they are as makers, as image bearers of God. And so there's those moments, and then just the beauty of human interaction as well, that I can often miss because I'm focused on tasks or, certain expectations. I share in the book about how the practice of breath prayers has been really formative for me to pause in my day, to recognize that God is present, that God's beauty is present, and to show up at the next portion of my day, or to enter the next meeting or approach the next task with attentiveness to beauty. So I might just pause and say on the inhale, Lord of all beauty, attune my senses to this moment. And praying the portions of the day, praying the hours of the day, having a liturgy of stopping, looking, and being astonished at what God is doing and where God is present is probably has been the most transformative for me on a daily level. And that's very similar to the age-old practice of Sabbath keeping, of course, but it's important to have a whole day, I think, in our weekly rhythm to be devoted to reattending to the world, reattending to God, but also to build those Sabbath rhythms throughout each day. And I think breath prayer is a great way of doing that.
Yeah, how would you widen that out to the church? You're referring to some of the ways that you practice breathing in beauty and the life that it gives you. How do we as churches practice that? And I'm wondering too, like, what role does the church have in conditioning us to then go into the world and see differently?
I've been thinking about that a lot lately in terms of Mary Oliver's mantra, where she says this is about her poetry, but I think it can be about all of life and about spiritual formation. Our ability to stop, be astonished, and tell about. A lot of ways, that's what corporate worship is. We stop together every week. We are astonished by the story of God as presented to us in every possible way. So that would be just to pause there for a second, say, what's every possible way that we can engage the body and the senses to help us be astonished at the story of God, right? The whole story from creation to new creation. And then to tell about it through preaching, to tell about it through conversation, to bring that into our daily lives, to recognize that every day is caught up in this cosmic drama of loss and renewal and transformation in Christ. And we have an opportunity to experience it and to tell about it.
Yeah, I'm curious the way you think about beauty in the context of a worship service, for instance, the way that beauty can form us maybe differently than even a sermon or in addition to a sermon, like beauty kind of maybe forming us in different ways.
Yeah, it's really important, I think, to think about all of the ways, all of the different forms of beauty, right? Because yes, there's literary beauty, auditory beauty coming to us through the word and through music, but there's spatial beauty, and there's tactile beauty, and there's olfactory beauty, right? And each Christian tradition, in my opinion, strong in some aspects of aesthetics and beauty and weak in others. And I long for each church and each tradition to recognize that so that we can begin to draw on the whole church and the resources of comprehensive aesthetics, right? If the Protestant tradition, for example, is an aesthetics of the ear, then we need to figure out how to draw on a stronger aesthetics of the eye from Catholic traditions or Orthodox traditions. And generally speaking, casting vision for every sense to be engaged, to take in beauty in every way possible. But also to recognize, that's sort of a maximal approach to aesthetics and beauty. And I think that's fitting for corporate worship for the most part. But I think there is also place for more minimal experiences of beauty through silence, through the absence of lots of inputs, right? And to have a flow even in the liturgical year and the church year between simplicity and abundance in terms of aesthetics can help people to take it in a way that's meaningful rather than something they're taking for granted, because there is an ebb and a flow.
Yeah.
So I know in your I guess we could call it your past life. You were a pastor. That was your full-time gig. When you thought about pastoring artists, specifically, but I think it could be drawn out to the ordinary member. What challenges have you seen for artists in today's world wanting to create beauty, wanting to be a source of that oxygen? What challenges did you see they kind of run up against that you had to pastor them through? And I think that could go also to just the ordinary member, the challenges they face in seeing and approaching beauty.
I often think about Tolkien's little short story Leaf by Niggle in this regard, because I think what his struggle in seeking to create this little world of Middle Earth and Lord of the Rings is a good representation of the struggle of every artist. And I think he articulated that so well in that story of, you have a vision of what you want to create. Seems like you're only working on an infinitesimal portion of that any given moment, right? Any given day. But so the struggle is to keep that vision alive and to have the faithfulness to just keep working on the leaf, right? Niggle was this painter. He had a vision of this tree he wanted to paint, but he couldn't get past the details of a couple leaves, it seemed like. But there's faithfulness in those small things that's important. The other really great thing about that story is as Niggle was painting this tree, he kept getting these interruptions from his neighbor Parrish. And he kept being frustrated about that. Like, I can't make progress on my artistic pursuit. My creative efforts keep getting interrupted. At the end of the story, spoiler alert, he recognizes that was a part of his creative work too, those acts of service. So broadening out the idea of creativity beyond my specific artistic projects that I'm excited about, and recognizing that all the works of our hands have a creative element to them. And that's important for integration, I think, for artists. As a pastor, I try to help uplift the uniqueness of the creative vocation while also framing the entire Christian life, the entire human life, as a creative enterprise. And that helped too for the congregation as a whole. Say, look, you're all creative. Don't give me this line that, oh, I'm not a creative person. No, whether you're creating spreadsheets or creating symphonies, everyone is created in the image of God to be a maker. Some people have an artistic gift, and that requires some specific encouragement. But that means that we're all on the same page in wrestling through interruptions to our creativity, visions for our creativity, not having enough energy and time, these very human things that all of us share. We can bond over those things, and we can learn from, artists can learn from folks who have other creative gifts, and everyone else can learn from artists in that sense too. The biggest thing for me as a writer, that's my main creative outlet, is to reimagine interruptions as gifts. To have discipline in my creative pursuits, to have a particular time and place where I'm dedicated to it, but at the same time, to recognize that sometimes I don't know how an interruption, so to speak, whether it's an interruption from my children, colleague who needs something, or something I've agreed to do in service to my neighbors, that can enhance my creative work. It doesn't need to distract from it.
It's really helpful. That's great.
It's good. Yeah, your creative work also involves your work at First Kinship Plot. And I know that's like kind of a fulfillment of a dream that I think you and your wife both have had. And I'm curious, first of all, just what it is, but also how you see that connecting to the work that you've been doing related to beauty.
Kinship Plot is a very exciting part of our lives. I love talking about it. It's a vision that God gave us during COVID for an intentional community that centers some things like artistry and cultivation and hospitality. So we had this dream, and we've started to unfold it slowly. And 3 years on now, I can hardly believe it sometimes it's actually happening. And I'm just so grateful. It's sort of where our vocations come together. My wife is the director. I help out in any way I can, but it's our passion. And so, yeah, the idea is that through artistry, cultivation, learning, hospitality, contemplative action, we want to encounter and embody beauty together. I mean, that's how it connects to what we've been talking about. Very practically, it looks like life together on a plot of land where there's affordable housing, there's various cultivation, permaculture projects going on, a rule of life for spiritual practices, very porous neighboring, and we're figuring it out along the way. Honestly, I mean, we're working with a church now in terms of a long-term partnership on a plot of 10 acres, and it's just very exciting because I think what's so powerful about it is like a little living laboratory for helping us reimagine some possibilities of resonance with God, resonance with others, resonance with creation. And that's our mission statement, is cultivating resonant relationships of every kind, which simply means vibrant relationships, relationships that are alive. It's a lot about beauty, where there's a giving and receiving. There is reciprocity to these relationships that feels like shalom.
Yeah, I love that vision too of, I mean, I think maybe in the one of the Protestant maybe overemphasis or underemphasis is that you just got to be convinced, right? Just give us the truth
Mm,
and we can convince you of the truth. And I think what you're doing there with kinship is, and I think what really resonates with me is like you can see the beauty of what a whole life, an embodied life, a neighbored life, an agrarian life could look like,
yeah,
and be invited into something beautiful, not just something that's not merely true, but also
yeah.
the abundance of beauty.
Yeah, it's really hard to explain it actually, which is
Right.
probably a good thing. It means it is something you need to be immersed in because it isn't just an idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a way of life, a way of being together. And I think the missing link often in my experience in ministries can be very, very disemplaced and disembodied in how we think about growth, how we think about flourishing. And so to have that rooted, landed, emplaced aspect to it, I think makes it unique for people to say, oh, well, this helps me imagine new possibilities for very practical things like real estate
hmm
and
hmm
life together and things. So I'm grateful to be involved.
Yeah, maybe on that note too. So you're in Charlotte, right? An urban place. We're in Asheville, which is a kind of we're in the city, and we're in an urban place, surrounded by natural beauty and mountains, but urban. How do you see, so how is kinship plot working, kind of these agrarian values in urban location? What challenges are you meeting? How are you trying to do that? How are you trying to encourage, in many ways, urban places try to displace us? You know, Charlotte's a driving city. It's kind of, there's roads everywhere, going to little pocket neighborhoods. Yeah, what are the challenges you're facing, and how are you trying to, restore place there?
You know, the vision is simply to be fully in place as long as God has you in that place. You know, I think it can be overwhelming to think about making commitments to a place, not knowing where life is going to take us, especially in the culture of mobility. You know, I face this in the church of wanting to have a church that was for a particular place in the city, but knowing, well, someone might intersect with this place for a year, or 10 or 50. And in the case of Kinship Plot, maybe a weekend. Maybe it's a pastor who needs to come stay for a weekend. Maybe it's someone who needs a house for 2 years. But what we want people to experience in that time, and I think this can happen in any church or any community, is to be fully there when we're there together. And that does require some people, at least, who have the long-term commitment, right? Who are grounding that effort and who've been working the land and who know the land, who know the history all the way back, right? Know the dynamics of watersheds and geographies and demographics. But then to invite others in without judgment, without even expectation, say, come, let's experience this together. What can we learn together? What can I learn from you of what you're bringing from your place? And maybe you'll come and experience this rooted life and go back to wherever you are and enter in a little bit different way, a little bit more imagination for the power of place and neighboring.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Kind of more of a selfish question for what we're doing here, but I love what the things you're doing there. It's amazing.
Yeah, when we talk about monastic values and vows of stability, it feels so radical to people. And people are so hungry for it. It's so attractive. But when it comes down to it, it's so hard to break through other commitments, the
Yeah.
distractions. But man, a slow life lived alongside others is something that people are really drawn to. And we need pictures, images that you're providing to be able to, I think, show people like this can actually be done.
Yeah.
You can do it.
Yeah. Amen. No, I was just going to say amen to that.
I'm really excited to press more into what you're doing. I didn't realize it was that involved and expensive. So what's going on at Gordon-Conwell? What's your position? What are you doing? What are the things you're really excited about and hopes and dreams, those sort of things for the future?
Thanks for asking. Yeah, both my wife and I are co-vocational when it comes to we come together for Kinship Plot, but we have our other vocational expressions as well. So I have been at Gordon-Conwell full time for 2 years. It's a seminary here in Charlotte, and I've been tasked with building a new initiative in theology and the arts, and it's very exciting. It's kind of a blank slate, so I've been trying lots of different things with events and partnerships. Eventually, the hope, the vision is that we will not just have a separate thing going on with the arts at the seminary, but I would love to utilize the arts to enhance everything that the seminary is doing. So working with professors, how might the arts open up new portals of possibility in your own courses, unleash students' imaginations? Yeah, we'll have separate things. We'll have a certificate in theology and the arts. There's a new Doctor of Ministry program that's already launched in art, ministry, and mission. I'm really excited about. We're accepting applications for that. And so some of those things are definitive already. But yeah, essentially just recognizing the formative and missional power of the arts and integrating it into what the seminary is doing.
That's good. And what you're doing extends beyond the seminary, right? You're doing some conferences that are coming up. Yeah,
Good,
you want to
yeah.
talk a little bit more about that? That's really exciting. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
The people that are going to be there, we're really excited about it.
I'm excited too. Yeah, there are some special events that I've been planning. Gordon-Conwell has several locations, so they rotate around. Charlotte is one of those locations. The North Shore of Massachusetts, north of Boston, is another location. Boston itself, and down in Jacksonville, Florida. So at least once a year, I try to have one big event in each of those locations. And this year, for example, here in Charlotte, we have this symposium on embodied faith through the lens of one particular artist who's centered embodiment in his work. Ed Nippers does these massive scenes that feature active human bodies, and they're biblical scenes, so it sometimes can reset our imaginations for the importance of these figures and bodies in the story. I'm really excited about that. And the interdisciplinary nature of those conversations is really important to me. You have pastors and artists and organizational leaders and lay people, students, faculty getting together and entering into that conversation with the gift of their own expertise and experience.
All right, we'd like to ask one last question, the last word from you, our guest, which is what's one thing you'd want to tell Christians who are artists?
Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. God will not love you more or less on the basis of what you create or how it's received. But God wants you to create and has freed you to create. And so there's joy in that, joy of the freedom that we have in Christ. And we can release the fear of results, release the fear of sort of expectations, and place those in God's hands. Just to go back to Leaf by Niggle, Tolkien's story, I think what's so wonderful about that story is, this artist thought he was a failure. He never finished the tree, and really depressed about what he actually was able to accomplish in life. And then when at the end of the story, when he's passed through death and he's on the other side, and he encounters his complete tree in God's new heaven and new earth, and realized that that everything he was working on was just a signpost, was participation in God's work of new creation. It just filled him with joy. And I think that vision of the future, of the God who completes our impartial work, the God who perfects us and glorifies us, can give us so much hope and meaning, and it can free us to not be afraid.